In 2009, a family in rural Ohio bought their dream home for nearly half its market value. The previous owners had listed it as a quick sale, motivated sellers. Nobody asked why. By the time they understood why, it was already too late to leave. This account comes from interviews the family gave to a local paranormal researcher in 2015, 6 years after they finally got out. Two of them still won't go downstairs in the dark. Every old house has a basement. Most basements have a light switch right at the top of the stairs. This house didn't. The family that bought it found that strange but not alarming. Old houses are strange. You learn to live with strange. What they didn't know, what nobody told them, because nobody who knew was still alive to tell them, was that the light switch had been removed on purpose. Someone had removed it so that no one walking down those stairs would ever see what was waiting at the bottom until it was much too late. This is the story of the Hensley family, and the 11 months they spent in a house that did not want them to leave. Stay until the end. The thing that happened on their last night in that house has never been fully explained. Not by police, not by priests, not by anyone who has heard it.
In the spring of 2009, Mark and Diane Hensley were desperate. The housing crash had wiped out their savings. They had 2 kids, Caleb 9 and Sophie 6, and a rental lease about to end. Then their realtor sent them a listing that seemed too good to be true. A 4-bedroom farmhouse outside Millbrook, Ohio, built in 1911, listed at less than half of what comparable houses in the area were selling for. The listing agent was strangely quick to schedule the viewing, strangely eager to talk about price before anything else. When Mark asked why it was priced so low, the agent said only, "The sellers just want it gone. Family situation? You know how it is." Mark did not know how it was. He didn't ask further. He was looking at a 4-bedroom house with a wraparound porch for the price of a 2-bedroom condo, and he had 2 kids who needed bedrooms. They signed within 2 weeks. Diane would later tell the researcher, "I remember walking through it the first time. It felt, I want to say, cold, but it wasn't temperature. It felt like the house was holding something in. Like walking into a room where everyone just stopped talking right before you came in." She said she mentioned this feeling to Mark. He laughed it off. Old houses settle. Old houses creak. Old houses feel different than new construction. That's just what old houses are like. Nobody mentioned the basement door during the viewing. It was locked. The agent said it was a storage area not included in the walkthrough, that the previous owners had asked for privacy regarding some personal items still being moved out. Nobody thought to ask why a storage basement needed privacy. The first month was, by every account, completely normal. The kids picked out their rooms. Diane started painting. Mark fixed the porch railing. It was, Diane said, the happiest her family had been in years. Then Sophie started talking about the man in the wall. She was 6. 6-year-olds say strange things. Mark and Diane didn't think much of it the first time when Sophie mentioned at dinner that the man told me not to go in the basement. "What man, sweetheart?" Diane asked. "The man who lives in the wall in my room. He's nice. He just doesn't want me to go downstairs." They assumed an imaginary friend. Completely normal for her age. They even found it sweet, in a strange way. An imaginary friend who told her to follow house rules. It became less sweet 2 weeks later when Caleb, completely independently, mentioned a man who stood at the bottom of the basement stairs at night. Caleb was 9. Old enough that imaginary friends were less expected. Old enough that when he described the man in specific, consistent detail, tall, wearing old work clothes, never moving, never speaking, just standing at the bottom of the stairs looking up, Mark and Diane exchanged a look that neither of them spoke about out loud. They asked the children separately, on different days, without prompting. Both descriptions matched almost exactly. Neither child had discussed it with the other. The basement door had an old-fashioned skeleton key lock. The previous owners had left the key with the lawyer who handled the closing, along with a note that the family found strange at the time and would find considerably less strange later. The note read, "Keep the door shut. We never went down after dark. We don't know why, but we never did. Probably nothing. Old houses are old houses." Mark, being a practical man, ignored the note. A locked basement was a liability. What if there was mold, or a gas leak, or some other practical problem that needed addressing? He unlocked the door on a Saturday afternoon in full daylight with Diane standing behind him. The stairs went down into darkness. He reached for a light switch. There wasn't one. He used his phone flashlight. The basement below was unfinished. Bare concrete, exposed pipes. The kind of space you'd expect in a century-old farmhouse. Nothing unusual. Except for one thing. In the far corner, away from the stairs, someone had painted something directly onto the concrete wall. Faded. Old, but still visible. A circle. Inside the circle, a series of marks that meant nothing to either of them. And beneath the painted circle, scratched into the concrete with what looked like a nail or a screwdriver. Repeated over and over, dozens of times. In a frantic, deteriorating hand he does not like to be seen. Mark photographed it. He told Diane it was probably some previous owner's strange art project, or kids messing around decades ago. He installed a battery-powered light at the top of the stairs that night. He did not mention what he'd found to Caleb or Sophie. He did not need to. That night, Sophie asked at dinner, "Did you find what the man wrote on the wall?" Over the following months, a pattern established itself, one the family didn't fully recognize until much later, when they pieced it together with the researchers' help. The activity was never random. It always escalated after someone went into the basement. Mark went down to check the water heater in July. That night, every clock in the house, including digital ones that should have been unaffected by anything mechanical, was found stopped at 3:33 a.m. the next morning. Diane went down in August to store some boxes. That night, she woke to the absolute certainty that someone was standing beside her bed. She said she couldn't open her eyes. Not because she was afraid to, but because she physically could not make her eyelids move, no matter how hard she tried. She lay there for what she estimated was almost 10 minutes, fully awake, fully aware, completely unable to move a single muscle, with the distinct feeling of someone leaning down very close to her face. When she finally regained movement, the room was empty. Mark, beside her, hadn't woken up at all. Neither child ever went into the basement. Not once. They refused, completely and absolutely, in a way that surprised their parents given how curious children typically are about forbidden spaces. When asked why, Sophie gave an answer that the researcher later flagged as one of the most unsettling things in the entire case file. She said, "Because he's not finished yet. He's still figuring out which one of us he likes best. I don't want him to pick me." She was 6 years old when she said this. In September, an elderly neighbor named Walt Ferris finally approached Mark while he was mowing the front lawn. Walt had lived on the adjacent property for over 40 years. He had watched 4 different families move in and out of the Hensley house in that time. He told Mark something that the realtor never had. In 1974, the man who built an addition onto the house, a contractor named Earl Doss, had died in the basement during construction. Officially, it was recorded as a heart attack. Walt said the truth, according to his own father, who had been alive at the time, was considerably stranger. Earl Doss had been found at the bottom of the basement stairs, and the official report noted unexplained bruising consistent with being grabbed and held by the throat. Bruising that, due to the position the body was found in, made no physical sense for a simple fall. The case was closed without further investigation. Small towns in the 1970s didn't have the resources, or perhaps the will, to dig deeper. Earl Doss's death was filed as a heart attack and the house was sold within the year. Walt said, "Every family that's lived in this house gets out within 2 years. Every single one. They always say it's something practical, job opportunity, family needing them somewhere else, financial reasons. Maybe that's all true, but it's awful convenient timing every time." Mark asked Walt directly, "Do you think something's down there?" Walt was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think Earl Doss never left, and I think he's real particular about who he lets stay in his house." He went back to his own property and never brought it up again. By October, the family had stopped pretending things were normal. The basement door, which Mark had taken to keeping locked again, was found open on 3 separate mornings. Mark was certain he had locked it each night. He began testing the lock obsessively before bed, twisting the handle repeatedly, sometimes 5 or 6 times, to be absolutely certain. It made no difference. Diane began hearing her name called from the basement stairwell, her own voice calling itself, the way water sounds when you can't tell if it's running or just memory of running water. She never went to check. She said something in her understood, on a level below conscious thought, that checking was exactly what it wanted. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in late October. Caleb woke up screaming. When Mark and Diane reached his room, he was sitting bolt upright, staring at the closet, completely unresponsive to their voices for almost a full minute. When he finally spoke, he said only one sentence, repeated 3 times, in a flat, emotionless tone that Diane said did not sound like her son's voice at all. He says it's almost time to come downstairs. Mark called a priest the next morning, not because he was religious, he wasn't, particularly, but because he had run out of other ideas, and a friend at work had mentioned that his church had a deacon who dealt with this kind of thing before. The deacon came. He walked through the house. He did not go down into the basement. He stood at the top of the stairs for nearly 5 minutes, completely silent, before turning around and walking back up. He told Mark very calmly, very directly, "I'm not able to help you with what's down there. I want to be honest with you instead of pretending. Get your family out of this house. Soon." He refused payment. He left without further explanation. They had already decided to leave. They had a new rental lined up. They were packing the last of their belongings for a move scheduled in 3 days. On what would become their final night in the house, Diane woke at 3:33 a.m., the same time the clocks had stopped months earlier, to absolute silence. Not the normal silence of a sleeping house. A silence with weight to it. The kind of silence that exists in a room where everyone is holding their breath. She got up to check on the kids. Both of their bedroom doors were open. Both beds were empty. She woke Mark. They searched the house in growing panic, calling the children's names, turning on every light. The house, fully lit, felt somehow worse than it had in darkness. Every room exposed and empty and wrong. They found the basement door standing open. The battery-powered light at the top of the stairs had been removed entirely. Not broken, not fallen, simply gone, with the mounting screws still in the wall and nothing attached to them. Mark went down first. Diane followed with her phone flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs, in the corner near the painted circle on the wall, both children were sitting on the bare concrete floor. Perfectly calm, perfectly still, holding hands. They were not afraid. That was the detail Diane kept returning to in every interview for years afterward. Her children were not afraid. They looked up at her with mild confusion as if she had interrupted something ordinary. Sophie said, "He just wanted to say goodbye. He knows we're leaving. He's not mad. He says he'll miss having someone little to talk to." Caleb added nothing. He simply stood, took his sister's hand, and walked up the stairs past his parents without a word. Diane said that as she turned to follow them up the stairs, her flashlight beam crossed the painted circle on the wall one last time. The scratched words beneath it, "He does not like to be seen," had changed. There were new words scratched beneath the old ones. Fresh. The concrete dust from the scratching was still visible on the floor below them, as if they had been carved only minutes before. She read them once. She has refused in every interview since to repeat what they said. She will only say this: "I understood, reading those words, exactly why he let my children go. And I understood that it wasn't because he was kind. It was because he was patient. And patient is so much worse." The Hensley family left the next morning and never returned, not even to collect the belongings they'd left behind in their panic. The house was sold within 4 months to a young couple from out of state who, according to public records, sold it again 11 months later, and again 14 months after that. The pattern Walt Ferris described has continued as far as anyone has tracked it for over 50 years. Caleb and Sophie, now adults, have never discussed that night with their parents. When the researcher asked Sophie directly, at 20 years old, what she remembered, she said only, "I remember it was warm down there. Warmer than it should have been. And I remember not wanting to leave. I still don't fully understand why I didn't want to leave." She was asked if she remembered the man. She said, "I don't remember what he looked like. I just remember that he was glad we'd come down. He'd been waiting a long time for someone to come down without being afraid. Walt Ferris died in 2018 before he passed. He told one final detail to the researcher that he had never mentioned to Mark. He said that Earl Doss, the contractor who died in 1974, had built that basement addition for one specific purpose, according to old town records Walt had found at the Historical Society. The addition wasn't for storage. It had been built, according to Earl Doss's original permit application, as a room for my brother. Earl Doss did not have a brother. No town record, no birth certificate, no school enrollment, no draft card. Nothing in 50 years of Millbrook history shows any record of a Doss sibling ever existing. The permit was approved anyway. The room was built anyway. And to this day, nobody knows who Earl Doss built that basement for, or who has been living down there ever since. The end.